Malebolgia deceived him with lies, then shrunk him in size. Here's a look at the McFarlane toys. Page Punchers, Spawn, and Anti-Spawn. Since the dawn of time, the battle between heaven and hell has raged. Both sides have won and lost mere inches in the fight. Under the watchful eye of Malebolgia began the Hellspawn program to create the greatest warrior hell could ever conceive. Not to be outdone, heaven's own scientists started to work on the Anti-Spawn program. Anti-Spawns, also known as Redeemers, were the pinnacle of heaven's soldiers. They were sent to fight against the forces of hell in a battle for supremacy in the afterlife. Now in the present day, the current Spawn, Al Simmons, faces with his former boss and mentor, Jason Wynn, in a fight to the death. Before we look at spawns of two different sides, I'd like to thank the folks over at McFarlane Toys that did provide this early sample copy of the Page Punchers Spawn and Anti-Spawn. We can have a look at this review. We're going to grab now the tape measure just to see how tall the figures stand. I'm hoping Spawn's going to fall over. Spawn has some harder time standing up, unfortunately. Anti-Spawn is about the same size, so what we'll do is we'll measure him, and then that'll be the same for Spawn as well. Anti-Spawn, in this case, stands only 2 3/4 of an inch tall, or both figures are about 7.5 centimeters in height. Bringing back the camera just a little bit so you guys can see everything that comes included with the Page Puncher, Spawn, and Anti-Spawn. You're probably also asking yourself, why wouldn't you have taken the time to prop Spawn back up? He's only simply going to fall again. But what comes included, at least with Page Puncher, Spawn, and Anti-Spawn, is, in fact, the first issue of Spawn. I can tell you my first issue of Spawn does not look as pristine and nice as this Spawn issue right here. If you certainly did like the reading material of comics and would certainly would worry about the damaging of your original comics, these are actually good stand-ins. The illustrations, as you can see, are just as good as the original printing of issue number 1, with some stellar-looking artwork from McFarlane himself. Flipping again through the pages, for anybody who hasn't had the chance to watch or read through an original Spawn comic, other than maybe just some advertisements that would not have been there in the original issue, and of course some advertisements here on the back for Page Puncher figures and the dragon we just recently looked at here on this channel, it is pretty much the same issue 1 of Spawn. But what comes included with this is the thing I really like about this set. You get yourself a comic standee. The comic standee is actually of 2 parts, the bottom half of this and then the top half. Actually, when you get this out of the packaging, it comes like this. Now, initially, I had put it the wrong way, and it's really supposed to go this way because this gives you the most stability. But you take these 2 holes on both sides, and you actually just line it up to the pegs, and these just attach into place. Snap it on one side, snap it on the other, and now you've got yourself a really interesting standee for your comics. It doesn't have to necessarily be Spawn, but as you can see, if you have advertised here on the front Spawn, you probably will want to display a Spawn comic inside of that. Now, one thing I will say, though, about the stand, as I'm just going to move the other Page Puncher figures out of the way, is with the comic, essentially what you're going to do is you're going to take the comic and slide it into the open canal here. And then you've got a back here that sort of helps to brace the comic. When you do slide your issue in, it does an okay job of holding it, but unfortunately what ends up happening is the comic still manages to lean forward, as you can see right there, which if you had still an original issue, would eventually just leave a long crease from one side of the comic to the other. So it's probably not a good idea to take one of your more valued Spawn comics and do what we're doing right now with this issue. I like the idea of it, but I kind of wish that they could have found a different way of displaying this. Maybe, if anything, if just to remove the comic for right now, if they had taken the standee and they took the back of it and angled it back just a little bit, it would then take some of the stress that would develop at the bottom of the comic, and instead you'd have the comic leaning a little bit further back. I mean, it leans back with me only angling it back like this, but if you have it straight forward, the comic is going to then lean forward, and you're going to get that really unsightly crease line in the front of the comic. I like the idea. I think they needed to improve it, though. Moving that to the side, let's have a look at then the individual Page Puncher figures. You get yourself, in this case, I'm going to flip this around here. So you get, in this case, you actually get Al Simmons Spawn, and then you get yourself Jason Wynn Redeemer. The neat thing about these is, as small as they may be, they're very nicely detailed. I was really overly surprised. No, I shouldn't say overly surprised, because we have looked at a couple of Page Puncher figures here on this channel, and I have been pretty impressed with the sizing of these things, how well detailed they actually are. But just to look at Spawn alone, you would swear yourself that this guy is actually a larger scale Spawn figure. and I've just got these giant hands. I don't have giant hands, but it's a really nice looking spawn. For as small as this is, the fact that they would actually go in there and be able to outline the eyes, for example, is a wonder for how small this figure actually is. He has nice detailing where you'd expect Spawn to have detailing in. For example, he's got the little arm gauntlet there, further up on his bicep. That's got some nice spikes painted in there. As you can see, he does have the M there on the front. We're going to talk more about the articulation here in a second. He has the skull belt buckle there in the front, some chains running out from that. And the chains, actually, if you flip the cape up, are finished all the way to the back, complete with a secondary skull in the back of his body. That's really cool. The thing about this Spawn, unfortunately, though, is while he's very poseable, he doesn't stand very well at all. Chalk it up to the fact that he has these tiny little feet like this. I really wish that with future Page Puncher figures, they would consider maybe including a display stand. Something small. It doesn't have to be the same size as a normal DC Multiverse stand, but if it was maybe just like the size of like a quarter, and then you had like indentations or grooves where the feet would sit inside of that, I think it would really help to stabilize the figure. As good as this Spawn really is, he does have a tough time to stand, as you probably already saw a couple of times in this review, and that's one of the reasons why in the opener of this review, I actually had both figures sort of leaning against one another. The issue wasn't so much Redeemer, the issue was more Spawn, and he just wasn't able to stand on his own, especially when you put him on something that's going to be, spinning around. The cape is nicely done, though, as you can see here on the back. Sort of has that layered look that Spawn has in his cape. I like the coloring also that they used as well. The cape is a pretty, not super soft plastic, but there's a little bit of give to the plastic that they used. Again, it's a really nicely detailed Spawn figure. At the very least, I would hope the one thing the figure could have had would have been a display stand. The one thing I think would have really helped this guy to stand out. Ultimately, when I do put this guy on the shelf, if I don't decide to put him back into his clamshell prison, I might actually just have this guy resting against something, just because on his own, he's not going to stand well at all. For the articulation here on Spawn, the head is on a ball joint, so you can rotate the head back and forth. It does look up a little bit. It does look down only just by a little bit. But again, I was really surprised with a lot of these Page Puncher figures that you can not only move the arms forward and back, which normally would be the case with a 5-point articulated figure, but in this case, you can actually hinge the arms out as well. At about 45, not quite at 90 degrees. But the fact that you're able to do this with a figure of this size is, again, quite the marvel that McFarlane Toys were able to even do that in the first place. Now, the legs, though, don't hinge as much out as the arms. You can only move them out only just by a little bit. You can then, though, still take the legs and move them forward and move them back. And because the chains are a softer plastic like a larger scale Spawn would be, it makes things very easy when it comes to moving the legs. Again, you can't really move them out as much outward this way, but you can certainly move them forward. Just again, I wish the figure would be able to stand a little bit better. Contrast to that, on the other end of the scale, then we've got ourselves Anti-Spawn. Again, check out the gold on this guy. The gold of the chain that runs from one cross to the other cross. The gold, of course, that makes up the cross on his face. Little tiny little spikes. I mean, again, I don't know if you guys can actually gauge just how small these figures are. I mean, there's my thumb. I don't have a abnormally large size thumb, but hopefully that gives you some idea as to just how big these figures actually are. The paint is really good, impressively good on a figure of this size. You got the gloves there done nicely there in gold. A same matching gold there makes up his belt with a little emblem there in the middle of it, and some really nice big blocky gold boots, which is one of the things that contributes to this figure standing a whole lot better than Spawn does. And in both the cases, actually, they have really nice sculpted capes. I know we already looked at Spawn's, but there's Anti-Spawn's cape, really nice looking cape. But because, again, he has the bigger boots, this guy stands no problem whatsoever. As you can see right there. Spawn, on the other hand, let's just move this guy. Spawn, on the other hand, you really have to get this guy to balance. And just when I think I have this guy balanced, ultimately the figure falls over. A lot of it really has something to do, I'm sure, with not only just the size of his footprint, but the fact that he's got so much plastic weighting him on the back of his body. The cape is probably a big contributor as to why this figure's falling over as much as he is. But still, really nice looking figures. For the articulation, though, on Anti-Spawn or Redeemer, the head is going to be exactly the same as the Spawn. So it's on a ball joint. You can rotate it once again all the way around. Ooh, try not to prick yourself along the way. Head does look down, head does look up, and you can also mildly rock it back and forth. Arms, again, in this case, do hinge out. And I would, again, say 90 degrees. You can take those arms, not pop them off in the process, but you can see they're just on ball joints. Pop them back into place. The arms rotate all the way around. There is no hand articulation, no elbow articulation. You're not going to be able to get that pulled off with a smaller scale figure like this. But the legs only, again, just mildly move out. I think they're actually just more pegged in place than ball jointed in place. You can take the legs and move them forward. You can take the legs and again move them back. You really wouldn't be able to get this guy in any sort of dynamic pose because, again, just off keltering his balance, the figure is going to take a tumble. All in all, just a great looking set. Short of maybe including a display stand suitable for holding Spawn's feet, I really am happy with how the set turned out. I like myself smaller scale figures. I mean, normally I'd be one that collects, like, for example, 3 3/4 inch scale figures. That was my bread and butter growing up. These guys are obviously going to be a little bit smaller than that, but you know, again, overall nice looking figures. I'm glad to see also that they included not only just the Spawn, because as we already looked at Page Puncher figures before, normally it's one figure and one comic. Spawn, on the other hand, is actually getting a 2-pack with both releases. There's this one, and I think there's also going to be Gunslinger, Spawn, and Plague. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm really liking the look of these. These are slated to release, as far as I know, in April 2023. And again, thanks to the folks over at McFarlane Toys, we got the chance to look at these early. Well, when figures give you lemons, you make lemonade. Instead of trying my best to balance Spawn, I suppose I probably could have used some sticky tack to put on the bottoms of his feet so the figure wasn't going to fall over here in final looks. I decided to get creative. And here in final looks, we actually got Spawn battling anti-Spawn to the death. That's what I'm going to be working with here. I do like the look of both these figures, and I love the idea that we actually get ourselves issue 1 of Spawn. A nice touch also on McFarlane's part to include that standee for the comic, although I do wish it actually held the comic a little bit better than what it does. But if that's something that they could actually release maybe as just circulating on its own, the idea of being able to display comics on standees, one thing I actually had to wonder was, even though it's using, included obviously with it is just an open, loose comic, but I had to wonder also, if you got yourself a bagged and board version of Spawn, maybe not one that's of a higher value like Spawn #1, but if you had a bagged and boarded version of a comic, I wonder if it would actually hold better in that, because of course you've got the supportive nature of the cardboard backing. I might just very well try that. And if it's successful, I hope that's something that they're going to release for future, like just release them on their own, release those standees. Put on the front of it like Spawn, Batman, you know, anything, and you can have some of your prized comics standing on it. Loose on their own, loose comics on their own, they're not going to hold as well as I would hope, but yeah, bagged and boarded, that might be something, an experiment of mine that I might try after this review. As for certainly Spawn and Anti-Spawn, nice looking smaller scale figures. They look just as good, honestly, as the larger scale figures we're used to getting from McFarlane's team, just though shrunk down in size. Again, the only thing I would say is a detriment to this set. It's not the sculpt, it's far, far being the paint, but it's just the way that Spawn stands. Again, smaller feet on tiny little tootsies on Spawn results in the figure having a harder time, much harder time standing than the equivalent Anti-Spawn that comes included with the set as well. Big thank you once again to the folks, though, over at McFarlane Toys that did provide this early sample copy of the Page Puncher's Spawn and Anti-Spawn, that we can have a look at this review. What do you guys think of this set? Is this something that you guys would venture out of your way to pick up? Let me know down below in the comments section. Also, as well, if you guys enjoyed this video, want to hit with a like. If you guys are loving the content you guys are seeing and on board to see more, then make sure you hit the subscribe button down below, and that you're also as well turning on the bell notification. There is going to be a lot more McFarlane toy reviews coming your way, so if that's your bread and butter, if that's the thing that brings all the boys to the yard, then make sure you're coming back to this yard on a regular basis, because there are going to be more videos coming your way. As always, guys, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.